Good afternoon, everyone. We're still waiting a few minutes for people to join. I apologize in advance. People are cutting trees next to my house. I hope it doesn't get in the microphone too much. If it does, please let us know in the chat. And for the rest, I'm just gonna give it 1 more minute, and then I'll get started. Okay, so let's start. People are still going to join, but I think it's good to start on time. So let me introduce myself. My name is Pierre Borckmans. I work at DataMinded as a data engineer / software engineer, and I'm mostly working on building Conveyor, which we will be talking about today, among other things. But that is not the main topic of the webinar today. So the main topic of the webinar today, and let me share my screen now, is about CICD for data projects. CICD standing for continuous integration, continuous deployment. We will also talk about continuous development. And so the full title was Why Manual Deployments Are Not Good Enough. Before I get started, I would like to involve you. I would like to get to know you a bit better. So what is here is a Mentimeter. So if you go to www.menti.com and enter this code, or alternatively scan this with your QR code scanner, you will be able to answer the questions, and I'm going to share my screen, and then we can get started, but at least I know the audience a bit better. I'll give you a few minutes to complete the questions, and I switch over to this page. So the first question is, are you building data projects? And I'd like to see the spectrum of people that we have. Maybe people are not at all building data projects, or they just manage people doing so, or they do it from time to time, or they do it very often. I see we have already some answers coming in. Very good. I'll give it a few more seconds for people to complete. Good. So I see we have very active people building data projects. That's good to know. Interesting. So no one is actually here managing people that do so, but don't do it themselves. So that's also interesting to know. Perfect. One person. Okay. We have 11. Yeah, maybe 10 more seconds, and then I'll switch to the next question. Perfect. Okay, the next question is, okay, so you're building data projects, are you deploying them to production? And that can range from, no, I only do proof of concept, up to, yes, we have full CI/CD pipelines to automate the deployment, and anything in between. Let's see who wins here. Automated versus manual. Tough race. Ooh, it's a draw. Okay, that's actually a very good starting point. Let me move on to the next question. So this is the last question, I promise. What are the main obstacles you face when you build and deploy your data projects? And here you can select multiple answers, right? I see people mentioning others. That would be interesting if you can put that in the chat. always interested to see problems we didn't think about here. Okay, so I see it spreads evenly almost across all the, the problems you can have. So that's perfect because we're going to talk about all of them today. Great. As I said, if you have others, don't hesitate to reach out in the chat. Okay, I think that's a good start. I got to know you a bit better, so it's a bit more fair. Now let me move back to the presentation, and we'll get back to the Mentimeter. Oh, it's still evolving. We're going to move back at the Mentimeter at the end of the presentation. So maybe keep that window open. Perfect. So that being out of the way, thank you for your participation. Now let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So first, I want to describe a bit what it takes to bring a data project from ideation to production, from 0 to 1. Then we'll go through the typical blockers, and we just already had a hint about them. That being said, we'll look into how to apply software engineering best practices to tackle those challenges so that we can have peace of mind about our data projects. And finally, I want to talk about Conveyor, which is the product that we build, the data-minded, and specifically how it addresses those concerns. By the way, this webinar is based on this blog post that I wrote a few weeks back, so don't worry about taking screenshots or anything. We're going to share the slides afterwards, after the webinar. So the first thing to know is that data projects, as you may know already, they come in many different flavors. It can be ETL jobs, machine learning, notebooks, even streaming applications, and many other things. So that's about what we are trying to do. How you do it, you can choose among many different technical solutions like Spark, dbt, Pandas, Python, Scala, you name it. It's basically endless. So it might feel a bit overwhelming. They're all different. How can we say anything general about them? But the thing is, they all share the same needs, which is ultimately you need to develop them, build them, test them, deploy them, orchestrate and run them, and then finally monitor them. So that's a good basis. And just a note in passing now, and we'll get to it at the end, that is exactly why we built Conveyor. The idea being to bring your data project, no matter which technology you use and no matter which use case, from 0 to 1. And we'll get to that at the end of the presentation. Just one thing in passing too is that, because we had that reaction before, Conveyor is not a CI/CD system per se, but it does make it very easy to build consistency CI/CD pipelines thanks to the CLI commands, and we'll get to that later too. Now, let's talk about the blockers, the enemies, the villains. So the first one that we do see if you build any kind of data project is, of course, you need access to data. And typically, you have difficult or restricted access to data, or you have unrealistic data. And what happens is typically one of two things. The first thing is, okay, I have some vague idea about the schema of the data, and maybe I have a sample locally that is okay or anonymized. So I'm kind of developing blindly. And what do I mean by blindly? I mean, is it going to work in production because of permissions issue? Is the data I have, the sample I have, is it representative? Are there some edge cases that are not covered? What about the volume? Is it working fine in development because it's very small? Then it's going to fail dramatically because we have huge data volumes in production. So that's one way to go. And the other typical way is a bit more hackish, which is, let me download some data locally, no one will know, right? And I mean, this is a bit as a joke, but like in many situations, we do witness that. And so this, of course, raises many legal questions, ethical questions, and yeah, so probably not the way to go. But we all have been there. The second big pain point that we see is that having slow iteration cycles is really a productivity killer. Like, you know, you like to have a coffee with your colleagues, but you don't want to have a coffee every time you make a change. You can only have so many coffees in a day anyway. So the typical things look like this. You push your change, you wait some more, you lose your train of thought, and then you become frustrated. And then you're like, okay, it doesn't work, I need to do it again. What was I doing again? This time it will work for sure, right? This is so slow. So this is the typical demotivating cycle that we see. The next blocker that we see, and it's a big one, it's the gap between your development setup and production. And that can be painful. The typical, yeah, it works on my machine, right? Then let me push it to production. Oh, everything burns. It works on my machine. So here again, typically you have two reactions to this. One is being the good Boy Scout, like, let me go to production, see what is actually different between production and my laptop, try to fix it. So getting involved, being in the DevOps mentality. Or you have the kind of old way, which is a bit frowned upon these days, which is, my job is done, it works on my machine, let me throw that over to ops people, and they have to figure it out, right? And this does not really work well in our experience. So I'll just hand over my code. What is different in production anyway? Doesn't really work for what we see. And then the final problem, so this was about development. Now it's about really pushing to production. If you have to do it yourself, and if it's manual, it's typically error prone and time consuming. So first you have to remember how to do it. How do I deploy to prod again? Then you might be a bit confused, not to mention new people onboarding your projects and so on. And so your deployments rarely end up in production, which is a pity, because then you have questions like, which version is deployed on production again? When was the last time we deployed? Oh, we should really be doing this more often. So those are all the basic pain points that we see in any kind of data project development. I hope you all agree with that, and feel free to add more in the chat again. Now that we have said all of that, what I want to do is talk about software engineering best practices, because as we all know, data project development is nothing else than software engineering in most cases. And the typical trend that is going on is that we mimic the best practices from software engineering and we apply them to data projects. So let me tackle all the points we've seen before with suggestions. They're not golden, silver bullets, but they're suggestions about what we can do. So first thing is the gap between development and production. The first thing we always recommend, if you can, is to use containers. Because with containers, your laptop or prod, there is no difference. So typically you use something like Docker. There are other solutions. And I don't go into the details here. That's the topic of another webinar. I have the link that will appear here at the bottom. But typically it abstracts away everything that you need in your project, which technology you use, which language, which libraries, and so on. You encompass all of that in a container, and then you can run it locally exactly in the same way as you will run it in production, in the cloud, or on-prem. And so that really solves like no more dependency issues, no more gap between development and prod as far as code is concerned. So again, much more in-depth webinar is available here at this link, where we take a notebook experiment to full production ready in containers. And it's a 3-part webinar, by the way, so it's quite in-depth. So imagine we have done this. So now we have cleared the gap in terms of code shipping. Now, I talked about access to real or realistic data. And here the recommendation we have is, why don't we leverage the production data access mechanism with a clear purpose? And let me explain what I mean with that. I think we established it's not a good idea to get some data directly from your data lake or any data source directly to your laptop for many reasons. But one thing we do have and will always have if your project is meant to be put in production is a production environment, which is represented here. That means this ultimately will need to have data access with a certain purpose. And by purpose, I mean it's because of a project or for a business unit or for any well-defined purpose. And by the way, this is how all the things like GDPR are defined. It's reasonable access within the scope of a purpose and so on. So that being said, what do we do about development? Our recommendation, if possible at all, is to take your code from your laptop and have a way to remotely execute it on the server. It can be on staging or development environment, but where you have data access, and you do it for the same purpose, which makes it reasonable. I know there are exceptions where this is not at all acceptable, but in most cases, this is probably fine. And because of that, then you're able to ship your code, have it run in the same situation, leveraging the same permissions, and then get some feedback like logs and see what's happening. And this will bring us closer to a faster iteration loop. So what happens if you do that, and if you're allowed to do that, then you have no more guesswork about what the data is, what the shape is, what the volume is, and so on. You don't have no more workarounds to get data, and you kind of have the same data compliance as running in prod in the end anyway. Now we're getting closer to fast iteration cycles. I really want to stress this, to invest in this early in your projects if they're meant to be maintained in production. Because having, software development is an iterative process, as we all know. I would argue that data processing is even more so. So no one, I've never seen a data project done right the first time. I don't think that ever happens. So that means please invest in a button like this that you can press at any time, and it will quickly give you the cycle of build, deploy, run, and get some feedback. Maybe it's logs, maybe it's data. And this is something that you're going to use many, many times. So make sure it is fast, as fast as possible, and smooth. And again, I want to stress, it's typically overlooked in the beginning of a project. I don't need that. I can deploy manually with these 12 commands and building my container and this and that. But it becomes very tedious, and then it leads to not doing many iterations. If you build it early, then you have it, and you can use it as much as you want. So with that, you can iterate fast, confidently. You have much less context switching, like, oh, I need to go to this tool and to that tool to deploy, and you have clear feedback thanks to the logs. And then finally, let's get to continuous integration and continuous deployment. I would argue that everything I said before, for me, is part of continuous integration, or you could call it continuous development, because, you know, like I said, it's an iterative process. You do stuff locally, then you push it to some environment. So yeah, what is it about, CI/CD? It's about automating deployments for peace of mind, for traceability, and so on. So the typical way, and this is going to be very high level, you typically commit some changes, and you typically do that to your Git repository or some source, code source, trust, repo. You push a change, and that will trigger some kind of pipeline. And what you want is that the whole pipeline is automated, from taking your code, building it, doing various kinds of tests. That can be unit test, integration test, it can be style checking, it can be many validation steps. Then you want to deploy it to some environment, and you want to run the orchestration and monitor the result. And you want that to be automated. And you can use, I mean, there are countless CI/CD tools like Jenkins, GitHub Actions, Circle CI, and you name it, it's all over. The point is, build that early, just as your green button. If you can build that early, even when the project is almost doing nothing, you will be thankful for it, and it will pay itself off many times. And then you have this feedback loop, which encourages you, like, I do a change, but I know I didn't break anything, so I can continue, and I can continue. So that's the virtual circle. What it brings is clear tracking of which version is deployed in prod or any environment. Deploying to production is not a big deal anymore, because now you do it every time you do a change. So it's not this end of quarter panic mode, stop everything, we have the release day, right? If you can do that, this is really something you're gonna love and not be able to live without afterwards. And you can do it, of course, several times per day. If your team grows, you're gonna have many commits per day. So yeah, and there are many flavors of this. This is a very high level overview of what you can do, but I think you get the idea. Also, something that is very important in continuous integration deployment is to have separate environments and then use promotion. And I'll explain what I mean with that. So typically you have locally, you're developing a new feature, so your package is ready. As I said, you're going to push it to your code source repo. And then that's where your CI/CD pipeline will kick in. But instead of deploying immediately to the production and possibly break things, what you want is to do many tests there. And if anything is failing, you want to be notified through your CI system. And so you will know if the build failed, if the deployment failed, if the test failed, anything that fails, you're just saying, no, we're not going to ship this. And then the other case is, of course, everything was successful. So now we probably deem this version to be good enough to go to production. And what you want there is to use promotion. Promotion means take the package as it is, exactly as it is, untouched, and put it in production. And you will notice there is no human intervention here. It's completely driven by CI and CD. So take the same package, deliver it untouched. So there is no surprise between staging and production. So like I said, you have the guarantee that the exact same code runs in production and in staging, no human intervention. I hope all of that is clear. So this is very high level, the typical problems we see and the recommendations we have about them. I know it's not very much in depth. We actually, if you're interested in one of those topics more in depth, please say so in the chat. What I want to do to continue now is explain a little bit what Conveyor is, why we built it, and how it covers some of those aspects. So let me give you a short introduction to Conveyor. Conveyor is a data product we created at Data Minded because we see those issues over and over again. And we have mainly two kind of customers: the ones that don't really have the ability to build tooling in-house, and they'd rather focus on the business case they want to deliver. And then we have bigger customers, and even though they do have the resources to build that, they realize more and more that's not really time well spent. We'd rather also focus more on the business. And so what we're trying to do is build you could call it a platform. It's hard to name. It's really helpers to get from ideas to production, so that all the cross-cutting concerns that you have in this life cycle, you don't have to take care of them yourselves. You already have a platform for that, because you have enough problems to solve in your data projects themselves. If you want to read about it, again, we have a blog post about when we introduced it, and we also have a webinar. I think it's a 45 minutes webinar where we explain in depth why we built it and what it can do with interactive demos. For today, though, what I want to do is specifically talk about the points we covered before. So one thing I want to mention is that you can try it for free today. You can go to this URL, and that is a read-only demo. So unfortunately, that will not give you the ability to fully do anything, but just get a sense of what it gives you. If you do want to get into full interactive mode, then we have this onboarding page you can visit, and you need an AWS account, and we will install it for free for you on your AWS account, and you can play with it and understand if it can bring value to you. That being said, let's talk about two things. So if you remember, the first thing I want to talk about is Conveyor Run, which is a feature that we really love. It's solving those three issues. So if you remember the gap between development and production, we're solving that with containers. The no more waiting, meaning I don't have 35 different steps to bring this somewhere and test it. It's just one command. And no illegal download on my machine, because we're leveraging production or staging data access mechanism. So the way it works is you just run Conveyor Run on your machine. You have your code ready, and you would like, you want to do this many times per day, right? So you want to see what's going on. The first thing it's going to do is take your code, your test, run them, build your Docker container image, validate your DAG. And then it's going to remote execute that on the cluster. Could be development, staging, production cluster, depending on what is allowed. Because of that, like I explained earlier, it will leverage data access mechanism. So it's fine to process data, not bring it back to your laptop, but process data. And then you can get some logs back and see immediately on your laptop, in your terminal, or in the UI, in the web UI, what is going on with your run. So this is, if you think of the green button I talked about before, this is the closest thing we could think of, which is just push one button and it will do exactly all those things for you. And it will be as fast as the technology permits. So I'm going to show that in a few minutes. So that's Conveyor Run, the first command that covers some part of this presentation. And then the next one is about CICD. And this is where we want to cover the complete data project lifecycle from ID to production. And for that, we have three commands. We have conveyor build, conveyor deploy, and conveyor promote. What does that do? Well, we've just seen conveyor run. You iterate many times. At some point, you think, I'm ready to ship this. So what you do is conveyor build. This will prepare everything, and let's call this build artifacts, so Docker images and other resources that you need to ship. It will package all of that and version it. Then you do a conveyor deploy to a specific environment, let's say staging in this case. That will make your build run in staging. There you can do more validations, maybe integration test, maybe human validation that this is indeed what we want. And then finally, with a promote command, like I explained, you just take the exact same package and put it in production. So with these four commands, we cover probably 95% of the cases we've seen so far. Of course, not everything, but it makes it very easy to build a CI pipeline. So this is not a CI/CD tool, but you can see how you can use that easily in your CI/CD pipeline. And then, of course, iterate many times. And then we just seen here how it works for one project. Now, what about multiple projects? And that's where we really like it. If you are in a bigger organization, you have many data projects, what you typically want is consistency between your projects. Because yes, they're each unique and using different technologies and solving different business cases, and yet you would like to deliver them in a similar way. And so this is exactly what Conveyor offers, is that no matter if it's a machine learning use case or a DBT use case, or you name it, we're going to follow the exact same recipe in CICD, which is conveyor build, conveyor deploy, and then conveyor promote, which makes it very consistent and convenient for someone having an overview of all of that. It always works the same way. Now, if I want to see the detail about how a build works, then I need to zoom in the project. But at least at the top level, it's always the same recipe. So I hope that is clear. I know it's a very brief introduction to some specific comments of conveyor. Let me show them to you. Again, I refer you to the other presentations if you want to know more, both about containers in general and also about conveyor. We have this other webinar you can watch. So let me switch to my terminal here and my code editor. Let me organize that a little bit, maybe. Okay, I hope it is big enough. Maybe Nayan, you can tell me if it's big enough for you to read. If not, I'll make it a bit bigger. So here I'm in a folder where I have a very simple PySpark project, and the details of what it does doesn't really matter. In this case, it's a dummy project that computes the decimals of pi by doing distributed computation. It's a typical toy problem, just to demonstrate what's going on here. And so the way it works is that you have some Python code, and in the end we have, don't worry about the details, but we do some math to compute pi. So don't worry about it. The important part is now I can run a conveyor run, which is the command I told you about, which you want to use many times when you develop. So if you do conveyor run, it's going to ask you on which environment do you want to run it, because remember, this is going to run remotely to benefit from the data access and so on. So let's run it on dev. And by the way, we have permission systems. So in this case, it's a demo environment and I can run anywhere, but in our organization, we can say those people and those teams can only run on those environments and so on. So you can restrict that. So what this is going to do is, like I said, build the project, upload everything, making sure everything is ready, doing some validation, and then finally run it as it will run in production and bringing the logs back in the terminal. So when I say fast, this will still take like probably 2 minutes, but it's not like switching to, okay, how do I build this Docker image again? How do I log into my ECR registry and push it? How do I make sure Airflow picks the latest image? How do I make sure I use the right IAM role to execute it? So all of those concerns that would make you switch from tool to tool and lose your train of thought. Here it's just one command. Now you see it's ready. Soon it's going to pick up the job to run, and we're going to see the logs happening here. So this is my Spark application, which might look like gibberish for some of you. Don't worry about that. But the point is, this is running on the server with the same permission as staging or dev in this case, and it's bringing me back the logs. And so it means I didn't context switch. And here you can see it's still running. It will still be finished, and you can imagine I can iterate many times without having to switch context. So that is conveyor run. By the way, so this is only the command line side of things. If I switch to the UI, so this is the web UI, and we've just seen we have a dev environment, and if we go to task execution, we can see indeed PySpark. I just ran it now at 12:57, and I can see the logs, which will be exactly the same logs we have seen here. And by the way, something went wrong, which is interesting, but at least you get immediate feedback. So that's exactly the point. You want to be able to iterate fast and not build, deploy, wait, and go to some CloudWatch to look at the logs. So that's the whole point. Now, that is conveyor run. Now let me talk about CICD again. So imagine this is ready, and imagine what I'm going to do here is not done by me, but you put it in Jenkins or GitHub Actions. So simple, like I said, you do a conveyor build. It's going to build your project, and then you do a conveyor deploy to an environment, and then you do a conveyor promote if you're ready. And all of that can be put in your CICD comments and will look the same for every project. And here the build is doing some validation on your Airflow DAG. Again, if you don't know what Airflow is, we talk about that in other presentations. So now it's been built and it's been given a build ID for a specific Git hash, so we can track exactly what was built. And if we do conveyor deploy and we specify, let's deploy that to dev, and now it's going to deploy it, and in a few seconds it's going to be able available on dev. And finally, like I said, we can promote from dev to but yeah, it's dev. Yeah, I think and I hope you get the gist of it. These are just a few comments that Conveyor does. Of course, it does much more. Like I said, if you want to know more, for instance, we also provide notebooks environment for exploration before you actually build production-ready code. We have cost management. We have user management. We have integration with CICD pipelines. We have integration with Gitpod and GitHub, and many other things. That concludes what I wanted to say. One more note. We are organizing, Datamined is organizing a conference in December called Transform 2022. And we invite you to check the website, and you can also scan the QR code. It's a great opportunity to meet with thought leaders in data in Belgium in December. And also we organize a reception after the conference in the evening. So feel free to get your free ticket on this website. I hope you got everything you wanted from this presentation. If not, let's go back to the Menti where I have some questions about that exactly, so you can give me some feedback. So the next question is basically open question here, ranging, was the session relevant for your daily work? Did you learn about best practices for data projects? Was I clear and helpful? And do you plan to apply any of the ideas that you learned today? I don't see any more answers coming in. Don't be shy. We'll give it a few more seconds. Then the last slide is about open questions. Just shoot anything you'd like to discuss either now in a short form or something you would like to see in upcoming webinars. I couldn't cover many things in depth because I went quite wide. But of course, if you're interested specifically in something, we can always plan a webinar on that. Okay, so I think we got all the answers we wanted here, by the way. So the session was kind of relevant, but not exactly. So I'd be interested maybe in the next question that you explain what would have been more relevant. This is kind of okay. I was hoping that you can at least pick some ideas to apply to your daily job. Let's see with open questions if you have questions, more specific points that you would have liked to be addressed. Again, don't be shy. Just shoot away, no problem. Okay, seems that you don't have questions. Don't hesitate to reach out to us through mail. You can also communicate on the website. If you want a demo of Conveyor, we can provide that. If you want to install it, follow the links. We're going to share the slides soon after this. And thanks all for joining. Nayan, do we have questions? No, I see a comment about the name. Indeed, there might be other conveyors out there. When we did the search, we couldn't really find something similar, but it's a good